And both her admirers and her detractors have referred to Nicola Sturgeon as the most powerful woman in the United Kingdom. The SNP leader has set her party a clear target to win the general election in Scotland and to critically influence who then walks through the front door of number 10 next month. First Minister, welcome. Now, it's very clear that on May the 8th or May the 9th, if you pick up the phone or he picks up the phone and you have a conversation with Ed Miliband, despite what's been said, we know what you want. You want an absolute guarantee for Scottish powers, you want an end to austerity economics, you want an end to Trident. That's very, very clear. However, you would have perhaps, if you do really well, 50 MPs, he might have 270, so it would have to be a two-way conversation. What happens if Ed Miliband says to you, OK, Nicola, we can talk, I agree we're going to talk. However, what I want from you is a clear, public, personal promise that you will not have another referendum on Scottish independence in the lifetime of this new Parliament. What do you say?
Well, I mean, I've made very clear, firstly, if you vote SNP in this election, that is not a vote for independence, nor is it a vote for another referendum. I've said very recently that if there was ever to be another independence referendum in Scotland, something would have to change in the circumstances.
But you've also said that could be a referendum, it could be an opinion poll. Sorry.
Do you know what? I'm not planning another referendum. We had a referendum last September. Why do I fall short of categorically ruling it out? Because I don't think, as a single politician, I've got a right to do that. Whether there's another referendum and whether Scotland ever becomes independent is not a matter for me to decide. It's a matter for the Scottish people to decide. There's a democratic lock on another referendum.
I absolutely get that.
Yeah.
However, we've got Scottish parliamentary elections next year, 2016, and if you don't put anything about a referendum into your manifesto for those elections, it's much less likely that one would happen. So that is in your hands.
If there's not a commitment to a referendum in the 2016 manifesto, and I haven't started the process of writing the 2016 manifesto, we're still fighting the 2015 election. But what I was going on to say is there's a democratic lock on this question of a referendum and independence. If there's ever to be another independence referendum, Scottish voters will have to vote for a proposition in a manifesto and have to give a party, presumably the SNP, a majority in the Scottish Parliament to get that legislation through. So I can't impose that on people. But democratically, nor do I believe it's right for me or any other politician to say, you know what, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of public opinion in Scotland, we're ruling it out. That's not democratic.
I do understand that. However, if Ed Miliband said to you, what I need from you, Nicola Sturgeon, is to say, there's certainly not going to be a pledge for a referendum in our 2016 manifesto, and I have absolutely no plans for one during the lifetime of this Parliament. Could you give him that?
Well, I have no plans for another referendum at this stage. I think something would have to change from the circumstances of last year.
Can I just ask you about the something that would have to change? Because you said it could just be a single opinion poll. It could be quite easy for you to turn your...
I don't think it would be a single opinion poll, Andrew. I think something substantive would have to change in the circumstances. Scotland had, in my view, a fantastic debate about the future of the country last year. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think Scotland will become an independent country one day. I think that's the direction of travel. But if there's to be another referendum, firstly, there has to be a substantive change in circumstances. Then people have to vote for a party that is proposing another referendum in a manifesto. And thirdly, people in that referendum would then have to vote for independence. The people are in charge at every single step of the way. I've described that as the triple lock. And I think for any Democrat, that should be sufficient.
Let's talk, if we may, about the money a bit. You want full fiscal autonomy for Scotland as soon as possible. Is that despite the fact that you'd have, according to the IFS, a £7.89 billion fiscal hole as a result of that? In other words, is it more important in the short term to preserve the Barnett formula and the subsidies, or is it more important to have full fiscal autonomy?
Well, the Barnett formula should remain in place for as long as Scotland's budget is determined by Westminster. Now, firstly, financial responsibility for the Scottish Parliament is about giving the Scottish Parliament the powers and the ability to grow our economy, grow our revenues, get more people into work and paying taxes. Even if we had an agreement for full fiscal autonomy, as we said in our submission to the Smith Commission, that would take several years to implement. And Scotland's fiscal position at the point that we became financially autonomous would depend on our economic performance between now and then. It would depend on the detail of the negotiated fiscal framework and Scotland's contribution to reserve matters. But at the heart of that argument is the argument that the more powers we have in Scotland, the more we can grow our economy. That's why, as part of that phased transition, I would be arguing to have the most important powers over our economy transferred first, so that we can get to work on growing our economy faster. Westminster.
Okay.
And remember, you know, in 2 out of the last 4 years, Scotland's been in a stronger financial position than the rest of the UK. I think it's been the case in 7 out of the last 10 years.
Well, I know these figures are much argued about. Can we turn back to the fascinating subject of what happens after the election? Because you're one of the few leaders I could talk to who talks about it. Now, it's been said that actually you have no leverage over the Labour Party at all because Ed Miliband could put down his Queen's speech and dare SNP MPs to vote it down, and you wouldn't because that would be effectively supporting the Tories. However, the question is, how would he get to the Queen's speech in the first place? Is your understanding that unless there has been some at least tacit acceptance that SNP MPs will back Ed Miliband, he could not become Prime Minister?
Well, I've been very clear, and I haven't had this conversation with Ed Miliband and won't, because I think it's right, firstly, that we let people vote and determine the outcome of the election.
And by the way, then Angus Robertson would be the person to do it, would it?
No, I'm the leader of the party. I would lead those discussions if we're in that scenario. I take nothing for granted in this election. But what I've said, and I said it publicly to Ed Miliband in the debate the other night, if there are more anti-Tory MPs in the House of Commons than Tory MPs, then if we work together, we can lock David Cameron out of Downing Street. And then in terms of the influence that the SNP on Scotland's behalf could have, that doesn't all come down to a Queen's speech. It's about the influence you exert across the lifetime of a Parliament. And with the Fixed Term Parliaments Act now in place, it is possible to change the direction of a government on individual issues without bringing that government down. That puts a party like the SNP, if we have that influence, into a very, very strong and powerful position.
And do you see a block of Labour MPs more on the left who are more susceptible to that kind of agreement than perhaps the leader is?
I think there are many people in Labour's ranks, including on their backbenches now and perhaps in future, who would be of the same view as me on many of these issues. You know, one of Ed Miliband's shadow ministers in Scotland was quoted during the week saying in no circumstances would he vote for the renewal of Trident. So I think there is an opportunity to build progressive alliances for more progressive politics, a real rather than a pretend alternative to austerity, protection for the National Health Service from further privatisation. These are the kind of alliances I would want to build.
And you've got more money for the NHS and so forth being announced today. Yeah. I'll let you talk about that briefly.
I want to make very clear, and I'm conscious of the fact that right now I'm speaking not just to voters in Scotland, but voters across the rest of the UK. And I've got to persuade and convince people that the SNP in the House of Commons after the election will not be any kind of destructive force. We want to be constructive, to get better politics coming out of the Westminster system.
So that poster, which shows Ed Miliband dancing to your strings, is pretty accurate. I mean, it's an exaggeration, but it's not much of an exaggeration.
It's about grown-up constructive politics. Remember, I was the deputy leader of a minority government in Scotland. We demonstrated minority government can be successful, it can be stable, it can be effective. And the NHS is one of the things that I would want to work with others across the UK to protect as a public service.
Now, you've said this election is not about independence, but the fact remains that what you really need is the maximum amount of disruption to the British political system to shake things up so that you can get what you really want, which is Scottish independence.
That's not my approach. It's not my approach to politics in the slightest. Scotland will only ever become independent if a majority of people in Scotland are confident of Scotland's prospects as an independent country. As long as Scotland remains part of the Westminster system, it matters to people in Scotland that we get good decisions out of that system, and I want the SNP to play a positive part in improving politics at Westminster for people right across the UK.
One final very quick question, Nicola Sturgeon. Two commentators from the left and right in today's paper say, actually, if David Cameron said to you, I guarantee you a referendum in the next Parliament, you could do a deal with him after all.
I won't do a deal with David Cameron.
Under any circumstances?
Under any circumstances. Tory governments have not been good for Scotland. They are not good for Scotland. I will not do a deal with David Cameron.
Very clear. Nicola Sturgeon, thank you very much indeed. Now,